Hey guys, what's going on? It's Zach from All Strength Training. I'm going to show you guys the InBody machine. The InBody machine is the way that we test body composition at AST. This is something that's included with all of our membership options once someone joins the facility. It's also something that we offer for people who are not members to come in and have done as well. So I'm going to run one of the body composition tests, and I'm going to take you guys through the report that you get, show you all the information that it generates, and explain how we can use it and how you can use it as part of whatever your health and fitness and wellness journey looks like. So let's take a look. All right, this is the full InBody printout sitting in front of me. So I'm using one of my old InBody reports just so we can kind of look at what this breaks out to be. But there's going to be a ton of information on here, and we're just going to go top to bottom and break down each of these sections. All right, at the top of the test, you're going to see a section labeled Body Composition Analysis. At the very top, you'll see member identification when you set up the test. If you set up an account on an InBody machine, it allows you to track subsequent tests. Highly recommend that you do that so you can get an ongoing trend of what things look like. But we're going to look at the body composition analysis part. So we'll start from right to left. So on the far right, we'll see weight. And then as we move to the left, that weight's going to get broken down to a couple of components. So first, you're going to see lean body mass immediately to the left. That's any body or any weight that is not consisting of body fat. If you look at the bottom left down here, you'll see here's where your body fat amount is. This is all done in pounds, assuming that you're doing this in the US. Otherwise, you might be seeing this in kilograms. But so we've got body fat mass. And then if you add body fat mass to the lean body mass, that should total your total weight. So, and then within the lean body mass category, it's going to break down into dry lean mass, which is all of your tissue that is not water. So this includes bones, tendons, ligaments, and muscle with the water taken away. Muscle by itself, especially, is kind of like a sponge. It's really, really light when it's not saturated with water. But once you add water, glycogen, blood into it, then that's where it picks up a lot of its weight. So we'll see that total body water is pretty significant. So for the average person, your total body water should be roughly 70 or 80% of your lean body mass. That's pretty typical. And then within water, there's going to be two additional breakdowns. So on the far left, we'll see there's something called intracellular water and extracellular water. So intracellular water means water within the cells. This is what's giving muscle tissue the majority of its volume. So like I said, muscle by itself is not super heavy until you add the fluid back into it. And then extracellular water is water that we could think of as subcutaneous water, water stored under the skin. The difference would be if somebody is adding, let's say, water to increase hydration, we're usually trying to drive up the intracellular water component. This is water benefiting performance, benefiting muscle strength, things like that, versus extracellular water often would be described with terms like feeling bloated, feeling puffy, just the descriptor, ugh. If you went out to a Mexican restaurant, you had a margarita and chips and salsa and a salty entree, and the next day your weight's up 6 or 7 pounds, you feel bloated, your socks are leaving marks around your ankles, you can't take your wedding ring off, that's an increase in extracellular water. Versus, let's say you did a hard training session and you trained your arms for 45 minutes and your arms have increased in size and diameter, we'd be driving up the intracellular volume there. So they both indicate water retention, but one benefits performance and one does not. So this just kind of breaks down how our body weight is not as simple as just muscle and body fat. Okay, immediately below that section that I just reviewed, we're going to see the area where most people who come in and want to get this test done, this is usually the information that they're more focused on seeing, because this is the information that's easiest to make progress on with a diet and exercise plan. So at the very top, you'll see this breakdown of muscle and fat analysis. And there's 3 items there. So we've got weight, we've got skeletal muscle mass, which is shown with the abbreviation SMM, and then body fat mass. So skeletal muscle mass is the muscle tissue connected to tendons and ligaments and connected to your bones. This is the stuff that helps you lift weight. We're not talking about muscles like your eyes, your tongue, your heart, your digestive system. So this is just contractile tissue. So weight at the top is fairly self-explanatory, and then muscle and body fat. Underneath each of these sections, you're going to see a down arrow, a flat line, and an up arrow. This middle section where the flat line is an indicator of what would be considered to be an optimal range. Now, optimal range is something we got to be really specific with. The optimal range is based on information from the World Health Organization on assessing mortality risk. So this does not automatically mean that the goal is that everything has to be in that range and stay there. This is just sort of a correlation with what data shows from the World Health Organization, but these are taking singular data points. So this is not something that I like to see people get super obsessive with. For example, if we look at weight, to fall into this optimal range, you have to have an optimal BMI score, which is body mass index. That's something we'll talk about in a minute. But basically, body mass index simply looks at your height and your weight. It completely ignores muscle tissue and body fat ratios. So you can have very muscular people show with their weight falling way above that range and looking like on paper they're at risk for potential early mortality issues, when in reality that's way less likely than somebody who flip-flopped their muscle and body fat scores. With muscle tissue, the concern is not about having muscle that sits above this range. The concern is when we have muscle tissue that sits below it. So when muscle tissue sits below that optimal range, we have risk for things like osteoporosis and osteopenia. And this is often going to be an issue with somebody who has either A, chronically over dieted and done, potentially extreme starvation diets, or just even as we get older, we start to lose muscle with every decade. So we start to increase our risk for bone breaks. It's not uncommon to hear of somebody in their 70s who lives alone. They fell, they broke their hip. They weren't able to get up off the floor. They weren't able to call for help. And that's what causes their death. So that's where that link to early mortality comes from. But like I said, this is a correlation. So we want to be really careful that we don't try to fixate on just any one single point from this test. And then with body fat, the goal should be to get ourselves within this range, potentially even going below it. Now, if we go below body fat optimal range down here, we start getting over here, it's not that it's going to automatically make you unhealthy. It's not going to necessarily improve health outcomes, but it's not necessarily going to reduce health outcomes either. What we have to be careful with is with body fat, we've got to watch how did we get somebody from here down to here? Are we doing more slow and steady, monitoring things like their calorie intake and their training volume, or are we using things like, potentially even performance enhancing drugs? Are we doing starvation level diets? Are we having somebody in the gym 6 days a week for 2 hours of cardio and 2 hours of training? So context is going to be really important there. But this section does show us the things that we can track over time and that we have the most level of influence on. And then immediately below that, you'll see the spot where it's labeled Obesity Analysis. This takes the top 3 variables we just looked at, weight, muscle, and body fat, and it puts them into 2 more clinical terms. So BMI is what I had just mentioned. Up above is body mass index, is based simply on your height and your weight. It does not care about the difference between muscle and body fat. So I could reduce my body fat by 10 pounds and increase my lean tissue by 10 pounds. And because my weight would be the same, my body mass index would remain the same. So that becomes a huge problem when we're looking at tracking progress for people and predicting health positions. Body mass index was designed just as something that corporations and insurance companies could use with really large populations in corporate settings to predict how risky it is to insure you for health insurance. But especially as it's become much more common for people to focus on strength training, you're seeing people who sort of disqualify them from the usage of body mass index. So we like to use immediately below that, we see percentage of body fat. So the way we calculate the percentage of body fat is we simply take your body fat score, so 32.5 pounds right here, divided by 185.3, gives us 17.6%. Now, the goals or the optimal ranges will vary depending on if you're male or female, just because females do have extra body fat in the way of things like breast tissue. So we kind of want to give a little bit of a disclaimer there. So for men, the optimal range is something between 10 and 20%. For females, the goal would be something between 18 and 28%. Just like I'd mentioned with reducing body fat to low levels, if we take percentage of body fat, let's say below 10% on a male, that doesn't automatically make them unhealthy. What we have to be really careful, how do we get them there? So this gives us, this section here are typically the things that when somebody walks into our gym for the first time and they want to get a body composition assessment and they want to start a plan, these are the things they're usually looking at changing. Okay, this section right here is called Segmental Lean Analysis. It's a very fancy way of saying where is your lean tissue distributed. So it's separated into 5 sections. We've got the right and left arm, the trunk, and the right leg and left leg. And with each item, you're going to see 2 numbers. You'll see the top number. So for example, on this right arm, you'll see 9.19 pounds. And then below it, you're going to see a percentile ranking. Now, the percentile rankings tend to be incredibly confusing. I don't like to look at those numbers. I just like to look at the top numbers because I am not completely sure how InBody decided how they want muscle tissue distributed. I've never seen somebody, and I've been doing this test since 2017, it's currently 2024, I've never seen somebody whose legs are in balance in terms of percentage with their upper body metrics. And I've worked with competitive athletes, bodybuilders, physique athletes with massive legs, and I've never seen those things match. So I would not worry about it. I would just look at things like if we look at the right arm and the left arm, how close are they to each other? You can see here, there's a slight difference in muscle tissue, but asymmetries are fairly normal if somebody is right-handed versus left-handed, or just not both sides of the body are perfectly symmetrical. So we want to keep things fairly close, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And then we can see the same thing with the right leg versus the left leg. 21.65 pounds on the right, 21.58 pounds on the left. Not enough to be really a big deal, but we like to use this. Once somebody has gotten a few measurements in, we can start to see, 1, where are they adding muscle? And 2, we can see, are they starting to develop any asymmetries? Or if they came in with more substantial asymmetries, maybe coming in off of an injury, maybe they had a shoulder rehabilitation, and so one arm has atrophied a little bit. We want to see, is that starting to come back in balance with the opposite side? So this isn't a section that I would worry too much about using with your first exam. I would want to see somebody get multiple measurements and start to see some building of muscle tissue first before we really start to get breaking down this particular section. Okay, so the next section down is labeled ECW TBW Analysis. So extracellular water is the water that I had mentioned way back at the beginning. This is the water stored outside of cells. This is the I'm inflamed, I'm puffy, I'm bloated water. TBW stands for total body water. So this is sort of like we have a body fat percentage where we're trying to keep it fairly low so that we're showing that we're relative to our total weight, we're maintaining less levels of body fat. With this, we're looking at relative to the total amount of water. We're trying to keep less water outside the muscle tissue and under the skin, and most of it in the muscle tissue. So you can almost think of this as a measure of things like inflammation levels and hydration levels. So the goal here is to stay within this range right here. It's fairly uncommon to see people move out of this range. Unlike muscle and body fat, the way that your body regulates its water, it's got kidneys and it's got a couple of hormones that are entire job is to regulate your fluids. So for most people, if they're doing their job, they're going to keep you in this range because this is sort of the range that you need just to stay alive. You might see some slight variance. I've had some people who end up slightly off, like the range here is 0.36 to 0.39. I've had some people show as like a 0.359, you know, or I've had some people sit a little bit above at like a 0.394, you know, but I don't see people way above or way below unless they've got some sort of kidney issue or potentially hormone issue. Could be a pituitary issue or something like that that could potentially compromise how the body is regulating fluids. But normally, we're just trying to keep us at the far left of that score just to show us that we're maximizing hydration and minimizing inflammation. That score can fluctuate day to day. Even if you take this test the same day of the week at the exact same time after using the bathroom, there's still the likelihood that you're not going to have exactly the same amount of water in your system overall. So we just want to make sure it's not fluctuating wildly. You know, but it can tell us if we went out last night, we had a cheat meal, and we went a little bit bananas on salts and stuff like that. We're going to see it when we run this test. So down here at the bottom is a sort of a Cliff Notes history of some of the more important variables from this test. This is when you have your test done repeatedly. And again, assuming you set up an account on the machine so that it tracks your data, we can see the trends. It will connect the dots on some of these different metrics. Now what we see here is this report will hold 12 different data points. There's also an app for the InBody. So if you set up your account on it and you set up and configure the app, it will keep all of your history going back, you know, as many years as you keep the test. But the paper printouts are only going to show 12 tests. So in this particular test, this covers about almost 2 years, a little over 2 years worth of information. This is actually my personal test, but you can see the weight fluctuations. You can see the muscle tissue fluctuating a little bit here. You can tell at times when I've been dieting pretty hard, and you can tell in this last test, you can tell times that I definitely was not dieting very hard. So you can see what that looks like in terms of just the records. Now at the bottom, you can see this ECW, TBW score. You can see that while on paper, it looks like it's been fluctuating up and down quite a bit. The differences are pretty slight. We've got 0.363, 0.362, 0.366. Those are basically hydration differences that you can measure in ounces. So it's not statistically relevant. Even with that, on paper, it looks like things are moving up and down. We kind of don't care about that. We're going to care more about things like that massive body fat jump that I had at the very end. That was sort of what I would call my COVID recovery stage, where I was not managing body composition very well. But this gives you an idea of what you'll see when this thing fills out over multiple tests. Okay, now if we move to the top right of the sheet, the first thing we're going to see is something labeled this control section. So it says body fat and lean mass control. Under that, it's got two numbers. There's a body fat mass number and a lean body mass number. You can see right now, under body fat, it has a negative 5.5 pounds. Under lean body mass, it has nothing. It's just flat. So if we go back over to this section, you can see, so if this is our optimal range for muscle and optimal range for body fat, right now I am 5.5 pounds away from hitting this spot. Now, because I'm already above the 100th percentile ranking on muscle tissue, it shows as a 0. Now, if my muscle tissue was, let's say, here, it would show me a plus sign and then let's say 5.2 pounds or whatever amount that correlates with. So while I don't tell everybody that this is what you should use for goal setting, it can be helpful, especially if initially somebody's coming in just trying to get their health metrics in order. This is not a bad place to start. I don't treat it as gospel, but it can be an okay reference tool. All right, next here we've got a section labeled Segmental Fat Analysis. Earlier I talked about a section called Segmental Lean Analysis. This works basically the same way. This shows you where is your body fat distributed, the right arm, the left arm, the trunk, and the legs. You can see that the trunk carries the majority of the body fat here. That's going to be true of basically everybody. Your body is more or less designed to lose body fat from the outside in. So typically you'll see arms, legs, face measurements decreasing first, and measurements like the hips, the glutes, the abdomen, even the chest for guys can sometimes be one of the later areas to really start shedding body fat. That's sort of treated as an evolutionary mechanism. The idea is that body fat is stored around the reproductive organs and around the intestines as a way to protect yourself from danger. If you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and it was attempting to gut you, the idea is that extra body fat stored around the digestive tract and the reproductive organs means that one, if it tries to swipe at your stomach, hopefully you won't bleed out and die. And two, it also won't compromise your ability to reproduce because the human body is designed basically to do two things, which is reproduce and not die. So again, whether you're male or female, we're always going to assume that it's going to be really heavily weighted towards the trunk in terms of body fat storage. So just know that going into it, that's super typical. Unlike muscle tissue, you cannot change that with the way that you train. You cannot do crunches to speed up fat loss from the abdomen in any appreciable way. All you can do is just maintain a caloric deficit, give your body time to start using body fat for fuel. On the right, you're going to see percentage rankings. Again, like I mentioned with the lean segmental lean analysis, ignore the percentage rankings. I find them to be completely useless. I would rather just see somebody look at the actual change in poundage when they're using this test on an ongoing basis. All right, next we've got basal metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate through the InBody is a projection. So this is not a perfect score, but I do find it to be pretty useful. It's basically looking at your projected resting or basal metabolic requirements or calorie needs while you're completely at rest for 24 hours. Now, again, this is a projection, so there could be things like a chronic yo-yo dieting history or some metabolic issues or other things that could change this. However, it's a good starting point to show people what their body's potential kind of looks like. So when I say this is your resting calorie needs, it's basically saying if you were comatose in a bed for 24 hours, not doing anything, not talking, just breathing and trying to keep all your systems on, this is roughly the calorie needs that your body would need based on how much muscle you have. This tends to be accurate based on if you compare this to like a VO2 max test, which is the most accurate way to test basal metabolic rate. This is pretty accurate. It's a great field test. It's accurate to probably about 90 or 95%, which is close enough, I think, for most people versus going through a VO2 max test on a regular basis. But this is not saying here's what your calorie needs are. This is saying this is what your calorie needs are while you're completely at rest. Now, knowing that nobody is completely at rest 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even if you're just sitting at a table in a meeting and your brain is working and you're taking notes, you're still expending extra calories. Not to include what you expend from walking to and from places, what you get at the gym, doing strength training, doing cardio. So we very seldom want to let calorie needs get at or below this value, just because this is gonna, if you start to decrease calories under your basal metabolic rate, what you end up doing is this is where you encourage your body to learn how to do more with less. This is when you hear the term starvation mode. It's basically just how your metabolism adapts to what you give it. So if I were to take this score at 1866, if I were to start feeding myself 1,500 calories a day, not just for a short period of time, but for an extended period of time, so let's say more than like 4 to 6 weeks, then my metabolism is going to start down regulating and I will start shutting off inessential systems, things like muscular repair. I might slow my digestion down. I might see a decrease in sex hormone production, a reduction in thyroid output, just to match the fact that there are very few calories coming in. So we want to really protect this as best we can and just give ourselves a little bit of a calorie buffer to meet this number or go a bit above it, depending on if our goal is muscle building or fat loss, or kind of where we're at. All right, the last score on here is something called visceral fat level. So visceral fat is fat you can't pinch with your fingertips. This is fat stored deep around the organs. Something that a lot of people are familiar with is a disease called fatty liver disease. That would be an example of somebody with very high levels of visceral fat accumulating specifically around the liver. High levels of visceral fat can compromise those organs' ability to function correctly. So visceral fat on an InBody is measured on a score from 1 to 20. The goal should be to keep it at a 10 or less. Kind of like we had looked at there being an optimal value with things like body fat, muscle, and weight. There is an optimal value for visceral fat, which is underneath 10. If you're above 10, if you can get it closer to 10, you're significantly improving a lot of potential health outcomes. As you start getting under 10, you're seeing less benefit from a health standpoint, and it starts to become more of an aesthetic benefit. Because if you're decreasing body fat around the abdomen, your waistline is going to get smaller. It's going to have more of an aesthetic impact. But everyone's going to show is some visceral fat. Just like with body fat, you're never going to have a score of 0. It's going to cap out at 1. The lowest I think I've seen on this is hitting a 2 for most people. But again, just kind of being aware that this is something that we want to pay attention to and keep it under 10. All right, so that covers the whole InBody test. If you have questions, if you want some feedback on looking at the test, feel free to drop a comment in the section below. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you can get more info like this.